Hello, my name is Doris Bellamy, and I'm the author of this book, The Haunted, published in 2018 by Outskirts Press. I'm also the illustrator in all of my books. The hook of the book is breathe with your soul, not your body. Sipnosis of the book is Adventurous City Jane pursues the country life while unraveling a breathtaking history that will literally knock you off your feet and headfirst into her devastating reality. Stay tuned after I read this story for an inside look at author biography and exclusive content found only here. The Haunted by Doris Bellamy. Jane was a city girl raised in New York her whole life. Now as an adult wanted to leave the only home she ever knew to live in the country. She has been a florist at a shop in the city since she was 18. Also loved gardening with her grandmother since she was a little girl. She grew up with her grandmother her whole life. After her grandmother's passing, that's when she moved into the apartment by herself. And now didn't want to be in the city anymore. The apartment she rented wasn't the best place in the world, but she enjoyed the comfort within, for a while at least. She found a job as a florist in a small town, about an hour in driving distance from the house her grandmother left to her in her will. So she was determined to take care of her grandmother's house. She finished packing up the last of her belongings, also a few things she needed for that night, grabbed her suitcase with a day's worth of clothes, and set off for the country. The movers would arrive the following day with the furniture and everything else. Finally, Jane arrived at this huge brown and white mansion on 7 acres of land that belonged to her grandmother. This mansion was completely surrounded by tall trees that sunk into the sky's blue, except these trees were closer than any you've ever seen. There was no way through or around them. Once you went inside, the gate entrance kind of looked like a big tall fence made of huge thick trees. Behind the trees, on the outer side, not very visible from the inside where the mansion was, but there was a wire fence from top to bottom embedded in the back of the trees within the bark, all wrapped in thick thorns and vines with no ends. The trees started at one side of the gated entrance, circling the entire property, and came back around to the other side of the gated entrance, taking up 7 acres of land altogether. Directly against and behind the huge fence of trees was a dark forest that went on and on, covering several more acres of land. This house was very private, in its own world really. Looking into the blackened woods at a distance made her uncomfortable. The gate opened slowly as her car pulled up to the entrance, so she drives through, continuing down the long tree tunnel driveway. Didn't recall even being taken here as a child. Jane noticed a big graveyard behind the house, not even close, but still some walking distance away. She pulled up to the mansion and sat quietly for a moment, gazing over its beauty. Yet it was looming at her in its own silence. An icy aura glaciates down her spine, leaving a cool sensation resting on her shoulders. Ambience of malevolent eyes billow across her entire being, a discreet presence watching her every move. Shrugging her shoulders while opening the front door with the key, she walked inside and looked around for a while. It was 2.5 stories, having an attic and a basement. Never seen a mansion before, let alone being in one, and now she owned it. Not finding stairs or any way up to the second floor, she started cleaning everything on the first floor, dusting, sweeping, and keeping busy for the rest of the night. Jane brought an air mattress and covers to sleep on. By tomorrow, the movers should arrive with everything. She got comfortable in her pajamas and brushed her teeth. As she headed down the hallway, she heard this strange sound coming from the basement. She stood still, listening. It sounded like water running. Continuing down the narrow hallway, the sound got louder. She slowly reached towards the basement door, grasping the door knob. Her heart raced. She closed her eyes while turning the doorknob, wanting to just hurry up and open the door to get it over with, but couldn't find the courage. I mean, maybe it was just a leak. You never know about old houses, right? Opening her eyes while still holding the doorknob, and everything went black. The power had gone out. Quickly releasing the doorknob, she backed up against the wall. Jane stood against the wall waiting for the power to come back on. All of a sudden, there was a dead silence as the sound of water immediately stopped. The crickets from outside was the only thing she could hear. Just as she was plotting how to get back to the bedroom in the blackest of surroundings, the lights flickered back on. Taking a deep breath, was back the other way, the floor creaking with every step she took. Decided to go lay down on the air mattress and locks the bedroom door behind her. Kneeling down, she gets on the mattress, laying there on her back thinking. A distant knocking filled her left ear. At first, it sounded as if someone was using the back of their knuckles tapping the glass of a window. While still laying on her back, Jane turned her head toward the left. As she did, it became clear that the sound was coming from inside the mirror. An odd sensation coated her exterior with fear. The tapping inside the mirror ceased, as did the fear fade from her restlessness. Wondering what had just happened, trying to stay awake as long as she could, her eyes slowly gave in and got so heavy she couldn't help but falling asleep. She heard her grandmother's whisper, "I can't sleep, Jane." The old woman crawled in bed with her granddaughter. Getting cold, Jane reaches for the cover, yet felt colder. As her eyes opened, she was embracing the icy cold white gown that her grandmother was buried in, trying to get uncovered by the silken cloud of white that was smothering her by the second. Her grandmother's skeletal remains jumped up in front of her, along with graphic sounds of climatic suspense, screaming as she awoke from brutal terror, gasping to breathe. While not able to feel her hands, Jane looks down at her hands to find her hands are numbed cold and graveyard dirt in her palms. As the feeling came back into her hands, the morning's daylight brightened the bedroom. A loud horn started honking outside. Jane jumped up, put her robe on, while running to the window by the front door and peeked outside. It was the movers, backing the big truck up to the front of the house. Finally, they're here, she thought. She propped the front door open so the movers could start unloading her belongings, and went into the kitchen and started coffee pot. She brought it with her yesterday because she basically lives on nothing but coffee. Well, who doesn't, right? Huh? The movers aren't making any noise. Raising her left eyebrow, she walks to the front door. Where are the movers? She asked herself. The door on the moving truck had been left open. Raising her arms while shouting, "Hello!" Jane starts going towards the front door of the truck, and she sees nothing but empty seats. Oh my, really? She yelled. What the heck is going on? Walking down the driveway, looking around for the movers, finds nothing but songbirds on the concrete water fountain. There were traces of blood on their beaks. Thinking they were hurt, Jane decides to walk closer. One of the birds flies to Jane while she extended her arm for the cute little bird to sit, not even landing on Jane's fair skin. The bird gashes its bloodthirsty beak through the exterior of her arm and latches on with its feet, screaming and aggressively shaking her arm, trying to throw the bird off. This small little vampire finch is hard to shake off and will quickly return for more due to its high metabolism. Nothing is creepier than a little songbird that latches on and drinks blood. Running towards the house, she realizes they are not ordinary songbirds, but vampire finches that hadn't eaten in a long time. Jane runs into the house, slamming the front door behind her, and hears water running again. This time, it sounds like a waterfall coming from the basement. Making her way down the hallway, holding her arm, notices the basement door is completely open this time. It is pitch black inside the doorway. As she got a few feet from the entrance, the sound of water stopped. She looks in the darkness, running her hand along the wall trying to find a light switch, and feels something wet on the wall. Jane pulls her hand back to find her fingers covered in blood. Letting out a blood-curdling scream, she trips over the placemat behind her, falling to the ground. She looks up in the gloom of the basement and sees a grotesque figure rapidly moving towards the door in the dark. Ascending to her knees, suddenly she slams the basement door shut, latching the thick bolt on the outside of the door. The basement door began inhumanly shaking within its frame, the doorknob twisting back and forth quickly right in front of her eyes. She panicked, running back outside, but somehow wasn't daylight anymore. The sun was going down. How much time had passed since I woke up and started my coffee? It was just about 20 minutes ago that I heard the movers pulling up, right? She climbed into the moving truck and shut the door, locking it behind her. Breathing hard, scared, and wondering what was going to happen next, she got in the big floorboard in front of the passenger seat, the darkness of night creeping up over the truck, filling the interior of the truck, leaving her hidden within the floorboard. It was extremely dark inside the truck, trying to feel around inside the truck for the keys, but comes up with nothing. As tears glided down Jane's cheeks, she questions if this is really really happening? In a soft whisper, she asked herself, what is in the basement? Where did the movers disappear to? Come to think of it, I don't remember seeing my car when I checked outside earlier this morning. When morning comes, will everything be back to normal again? Wanting to go to sleep to escape from reality, Jane squeezes her eyes closed as she lays her head back on the passenger seat, taking a deep breath while gazing up through the windshield at the dark blue sky. She slowly falls asleep. Jane's eyes quickly open, responding to the loud sound of an overslammed car door. She raises her head off the seat into the daylight as she catches a glimpse of something quickly passing the truck headed to the house. Jane slowly lifts herself up onto the passenger seat, looking around the yard, noticed a black hearse in the driveway. She slowly slips back down into the floorboard, hesitant to move anywhere. She sits in silence for a few minutes until she heard a thudding noise. Someone was carrying something. As it was dragging, it kept hitting the floor. It got louder as she heard it come out of the house onto the porch. She slowly raised a bit so she wasn't too noticeable. She saw a tall man in a long black coat. He was dragging a black body bag on the ground as he walked, pulling it towards the hearse. Couldn't really see his face much. As he turned the other way with his back to Jane, he threw the body bag in the hearse, making a loud thud as he threw it in. Quickly, Jane dropped in the floorboard faster than she had ever dropped before. She couldn't feel or hear anything except her heart beating and uncontrolled breathing. Hearing the hearse start up, she decided to sit and wait for a few minutes. I know whoever that was would probably be back soon, right? Lifting herself up from the floorboard slowly, being careful not to attract any unwanted attention, she looks around a second time just to make sure the way was clear. Opening the truck door with caution, continually looking in every direction. The gate at the entrance was shut and chained. The night decided to grace her with its presence. Not having any options, Jane walked towards the house. The lights were on. She steps inside the open front door and sees streaks of blood on the floor coming from the hallway to the front door, fading across the front porch and disappearing through the rough grass. Gasping as she takes a step back, stumbles on something, almost losing her balance, and looks down where she stepped to find it was a severed head dripping with blood. Ah! Screamed Jane. Frantically breathing, runs into the hallway to walk in the closet. Locking herself inside, she backed up to the wall as her head hit a dangling chain. She reached up and pulled it, and the closet light came on. There was another chain hanging down. It was to an entrance on the ceiling. She decides to take her chances and pulled down the little steps, heading up to the second floor. Hearing a distant piano playing, sounded like a creepy music box. The smooth, ethereal melody comforted her for a moment, yet the creepy laughter of children made her sense a cold embrace from head to toe. Then she was looking to find where the music was coming from. Maybe it was someone who could help her back to the city. Quickly reached a conclusion that it wasn't a good idea to find whomever was playing the blood-chilling melody. Either way, she had to do something. She noticed the second floor was completely different from the first floor. There was big red spots on the floor. As she got closer, she noticed they were puddles of blood, some dry, some fresh. It was a different theme entirely. Downstairs was a modern family home, cozy and inviting. The second floor was cold and creepy, and had chains hanging from the ceiling of each room. Attached to the end of each chain was either a body part or an organ, human body parts from all age groups, young and old. At this point, Jane didn't want to scream, not wanting to be heard, but that didn't stop tears from falling down her face. These body parts were tagged. She started looking at them one by one. They each had a name, date, and a job title on them. One souvenir body part for each person who was slaughtered. She read several tags and began getting sick as she saw some chains had severed heads that were not cut off but ripped off their bodies. The other chains had hearts. As she got to the last room, she noticed 2 chains were empty, possibly 2 more victims. At this point, she knew she had to get out of this nightmare, but didn't even know how to escape. There was a staircase that had already been pulled down from from the ceiling leading to the attic. Wandering slowly up the staircase, she smelled human flesh burning, an overbearing smell that was making her gag. Finally, she climbed up into the opening in the ceiling. Stepping up into the attic, there was a big table in the center of the attic. Directly above this table in the ceiling was an opening by itself. The opening in the roof was taking the shape of a huge six-sided star. Puzzled about the ceiling opening, she continued towards the table, getting closer and sees a body on the table. It was shackled down by each limb. It was as black as charcoal and had been not only burned but cooked slowly. The only thing that wasn't severely black was the hands and feet where the victim was bound. There was a hole in the chest of the charcoaled individual where the heart had been extracted. Shelves lined surrounding walls. There was all kinds of surgical equipment hanging from them. Directly behind all the shelves was soundproof panels attached to all the walls. A big metal sink filled with bloody organs. The victim on the table was alive when their organs were dissected out of them, then burned slowly. Jane wondered, who's next? Oh my, the graveyard, Jane thought. She vividly remembered the graveyard she'd seen behind the house. Scared to death, she started running back down through the bloody labyrinth, trying to go back the same way she came up, but the house seemed as if it were alive because the scenery had completely changed. Walls, doors, ceilings had all been rearranged. Now on the second floor of the mansion, blood painted the walls from ceiling to floor. Every wall was coated in the deepest red. She could see the walls slowly moving, just as a waterbed would move. You plunged your hand down on it. Distant voices slowly filled her ears, sinking her heart into her abdomen. The chains that hung before from the ceiling of every room had vanished. This time, every room was filled with the biggest clear glass jars. On every wall, hung close together, were skeleton bones from human rib cages, dangling together, sounding as dull wind chimes. She bent over, gazing into the jars to see what was in them. She picked one up and held it, turning it in her hands. The light red liquid and contents started moving as she turned the jar, gasping as the jar slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor at her feet, exposing a set of eyeballs, a tongue, and genitals of a man, screaming while running through the rooms of jarred, bloody genitals and such. Making her way down to the first floor, she heard a car door, and her eyes widened in fear. She stays in the walk-in closet with the door locked and quickly turns the light off, slides under the big shoe rack, and pulled the blanket laying on the top of the shoes over her, and waited in terror. The tall man in the long black coat was back. She heard his boots going up the stairs that she never found. She slowly came out of the closet, and the front door was shut. Jane tried opening the door, but it was tightly shut, latched at the top with very thick bolts that she didn't notice before. Out of Jane's reach, frantically checks the windows. Desperately trying to open the window by the front door, she notices the mover's truck was gone, just like her car vanished. Yelling in her mind, "No! How am I going to get out of here?" Trapped, she had no choice but to go to the basement. She unlatched the thick bolt in the center of the basement door, trembling as she opened the door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside the basement. As she did, two small, very dim lights came on, one on each side of the step she stood on. Small dim lights were sitting inside human skulls, facing her direction. Each step she took further down the staircase, another set of skull lights would come on beside each step. Reaching the bottom, another dim light came on as she stood on the concrete floor, but this light was above her head and a skull hanging from the ceiling. She continued walking, and as she did, other lights came on above her head. It's as if she was expected to be there. The ceiling of the basement was gigantically domed, looking as if it actually would take up the whole first floor of the mansion. She heard growling as a light revealed tall cages lined up on the left side of the basement. The center cage was the biggest of them all. Inside the center cage were several oversized vicious dogs, long white fangs sticking out of their mouths, dripping with foam and saliva. As their mouths watered, they were snarling. Their eyes pierced her soul. Jane's breathing became heavy, and the dogs were furiously jumping up against the bars of the cage. As she slowly walked by them, the growling and barking became more intense. These dogs were excited at the sight of her, wanting nothing more than to tear her flesh and devour her body within seconds. A loud crash startled Jane as the ceiling opened above the dog's cage. A man was thrown down inside the cage alive, his body not even reaching the ground before the dogs rapidly tore him into shreds. Jane was terrified at the sight of his body being divided amongst the dogs so easily, blood coating the dog's thick fur. On the right side of the basement were torture chambers. There was blood all over the floors, followed by big tanks of water that started draining into the ground. As the tanks drained, the roar of a waterfall filled the atmosphere. That's where the sound of water came from, she thought. Directly in front of her, hanging from the ceiling, were long knives, blades, whips, and chains, saws, along with many foreign objects she had never seen before. She started running as fast as she could under the sharp, body-sculpting collection, and she got to a set of stairs, immediately climbing them until she got to the storm doors that were already open. She stuck her head out into the dark, not looking around, run straight towards the graveyard. The darkness became lighter as she got closer to the graveyard. The oddly shaped tombstones had dim skulled lights at the center of each stone, similar to the dim lights in the basement, except these skulls were smaller, possibly belonging to children, she thought. Thick fog covered the ground, hugging the gravestones and fading up into the moonlight. The distant sound of howling slowed her down. Jane started walking through the graveyard, looking at the tombstone. Tombstones reminded her of the tags on the human heads and hearts hanging from the chains on the second floor. The tombstones had a name, date, and job title. She read a few when she got to the back of the enclosed graveyard. Jane was panicking as she seen some of the dates were very recent. She spotted a gravestone with her grandmother's name engraved on it and the exact dates of her life from start to finish. She fell down on that grave and seen loving grandmother imprinted on the bottom of the gravestone. She cried out loud, then curled up in her own little ball, running her hand on the smooth grass on top of the grave and thinking about her grandmother. Talking out loud to herself, she said, "Grandmother died in a car accident, and her body was supposed to have been in the car as it exploded in the accident. And her burial was even in a different county. Could it possibly be true?" "Yes, it's true," she heard in a deep, heart-gripping voice coming from behind her. She couldn't breathe as her chest grew tighter and didn't want to turn around. As she slowly turned around, she saw the tall, sinister man in the long black coat standing a few graves away from her. He said, "I'm the man who lured your grandmother here to my mansion, just as I did you with the letter and key I sent you. You see, I had to feed the mansion," James declared. "What?" exclaimed Jane. The man's face was barely visible due to hood on his head. "Yes, my name is James. The mansion feeds on the life in humans with pure hearts, and those who aren't worthy lose their heads instead of their hearts." "James? Your name is James?" "Yes," shouted the man, aggravated at the statement he'd already made. Jane questioned every single detail of who he was and why he took her grandmother, then stated, "Wait a minute, James was the name of the lawyer who sent my grandmother's will." "That's me," said James. "She didn't even have a will," followed by hysterical laughter. "Aren't you going to run, Jane? There's no way out. The last 2 chains on the second floor are for us. I finish you, then the mansion finishes me." His laugh made her tremble as it poured through her ears, attacking her internally. She got up on her knees as he pointed to a fresh grave dug with a headstone reading, "Jane Williams, 1975 to 2015, small town florist." Jane panicked, breathing uncontrollably while crying, started looking in every direction, quickly trying to think of a way to distract him and get away, desperately crying out inside to wake up from this nightmare. Clenches her eyes tight, then looks down towards her feet. She notices part of a boulder. From the looks of it, someone busted the boulder, leaving it jagged and rough. James started laughing again as the rain came tumbling down through the night sky, quickly coating everything in sight, filling the empty grave by the second. The rain fell even harder, lashing their skin. James slowly stepped towards her. Jane's breathing escalated rapidly. She slowly bent over, pretending to give up as she ran her hands down her thighs to her knees. Pausing, she noticed his shadow getting closer, covering hers. She grabbed the jagged boulder and threw it directly at James with every ounce of strength that she had. The jagged boulder smashed into James's eye. Jane took off towards the house. All she heard while she ran for her life was yelling, followed by creepy laughter. The ground started trembling, making it hard to keep keep balance. She glanced back as she ran, but the man vanished through the thick fog and heavy rain. Not knowing where to run, she goes back into the basement. If I can't get out of this place, I'm going to kill him, she thought. As she enters the basement, the lights didn't come back on. She hopped on the step, wanting a light to come on so badly. Instead of taking any chances that the dogs were loose, she ran back outside, running around the huge estate. Made her feel like the exterior walls went on forever. Where did the man go, she wondered, completely out of breath. Jane decided to stop behind a bush. Glaring through the bush, she noticed headlight in the front yard, waiting in fear that she might never make it out alive. The ground started shaking again. Her feet were sinking in the mud as she stood still. It felt like there were hands around each of her feet inside the mud, gripping her tight, yelling while trying to free her feet from the mud. But still, Jane kept sinking further and further. The ground was swallowing Jane alive, pulling her under slowly. Already up to her waist, Jane screams for her life, only hears distant voices. The muddy ground up to her neck and her hands partially sticking out of the brown liquid. She feels big, cold hands grabbing hers. James pulled her easily out of her deathbed. He threw her over his shoulder as if she were a rag doll, taking her back into the mansion up into the attic. Although her view was upside down, she noticed the mansion had changed once again. James slung her body over the dissection table in the attic. The roof began opening. As Jane's body slammed onto the table, she grunted, losing the air that once filled her lungs by the forceful blow. James begins describing his devotion to her grandmother, crying out loud. She didn't understand why he kept bringing up the same subject over and over. I knew your mom, James said softly, gasping. As her tears continued, Jane questioned him. You did? Yes, I did, he stated. How did you know my mom? Well, we used to date. Then after a while, she got pregnant with you, and your grandmother made me believe that your mom had an abortion before she died. So I kept trying to figure out for myself what happened to her. Then I found you. Don't you remember me from your childhood, Jane? I'm the man that always stood beside the fence in the backyard where you used to swing all the time. Oh my, Dad? Yes, I am, declared Jane. Since the beginning, your grandmother hated me. She made sure I never had a chance with your mom, so she killed your mom here on this very same table. This is the mansion I bought your mom after we got engaged. After her death, I've been collecting the pure in heart to resurrect her. What? Sacrifice? What are you talking about? Is it me? Am I the sacrifice, James? Are you going to kill me? Are you going to kill your daughter? Well, now that's completely up to you, princess. If you want to be a sacrifice, your mom's soul will take over your body. We will be reunited at last. Or you can take her place. It's up to you, dear child. Jane took a deep breath and asked, what do you mean replace her? I don't understand. Yes, you understand perfectly, my darling Jane. You will be by my side and we will continue feeding the mansion as it's always been. I do believe your grandmother is inside this mansion, in every wall, in every room, feeding off of the pure, even the terrain around the foundation, through every acre. Wait, I saved you from her earlier as she pulled you under. Didn't you feel her, Jane? And only I have the power to free you because I'm the medium here. So I'm giving you a chance to work by my side. Father and daughter, you bring them in and I'll do the rest. Until we have enough of the pure in heart, this will go on forever. So what will it be, Jane? A silence filled the smoggy attic. Jane didn't know how to respond. Jane started secretly talking in her mind. Well, if I say no, he will kill me. If I say yes, I have a chance to get out of here. So there's only one option, clearing her throat. Yes, James. I'll take her place. I'll stay with you, then I'll go out and lure people into your mansion. I won't let you down, good girl, said James. He grinned from ear to ear. Now, just need to test your loyalty. What? Why? Jane questioned. Just need to seal your body with my mark. Then you will be tested in the basement. What? I've seen the basement. Why don't you just kill me now instead of torturing me? You know what, Jane? I've got a better idea. I'm leaving to the city. When I get back, you will be slaughtering your first victim. Ah, no, yelled Jane. You said I'll bring them to you and you would take care of the rest, right? Yes, dear child. After you prove your loyalty to me, then you will bring them to me. Oh my, Jane screamed. Don't believe this is happening to me. Jane's left her chain down on the bloody table, and she wept in her sorrow. No way out, Jane whispered. Either way I choose, there's no way out. I don't want to kill anyone, let alone dissect them, and whatever else he does. I've just got to get out of here before he gets back. Twisting her hand back and forth in the shackle for hours, her wrist grew sore. Is this it for me? Jane wondered. The walls within the mansion trembled as the lights flickered on and off. A distant argument surfaced Jane's ears, growing in volume. The distance rapidly faded between the angry voices and Jane, leaving her to drown in her own fear. James reaches the attic, dragging a woman facing downward by the hair. This woman was bound by sharp, jagged fence wire on her hands and feet. James slung the mystery woman across the attic. Long brown hair hung down in her face as she wailed. "Jane, cut your first victim free," stated James. As he unchained Jane's raw wrist, bloodied from hours of struggle, Jane grabbed the razor-sharp wire cutter, slowly making her way to the frightened mystery woman. "Hello?" Jane whispered softly. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm going to cut you loose." Jane reaches towards the mystery woman's hair, lifting it out of her face. Jane's heart descended rapidly, plunging through her brittle core as her eyes glared over her own reflection. A solid, invisible blow in her gut forced the air right out of Jane within seconds. Jane stumbles backward repeatedly, moving quickly as far away as possible. Heinous laughter swallowed the room and its contents. James ghastly smiled as he bent down facing Jane. "What's wrong, Jane? Are you scared of yourself? Look at her again, Jane. Your mother had identical twin girls. You two weren't together long. Your mother was murdered by her mom. Your grandparents were separated. Then you went to live with your grandmother, and your twin sister, Janet, lived with your grandfather. You know what has to be done, Jane. So don't waste any more time. Okay, James, tell me what to do, and I'll kill her." The tall, cynical man pulled out his body sculpting equipment, anticipating every rugged cut Jane would make into Janet's flesh. Jane smiled slightly, squinting her eyes. "What do you want me to do first, Jane? Should I make an incision through her chest, carving around her heart?" Jane glided her hand across the handles of the jaggedly sharp carving knives, while James escorted Janet, kicking and screaming, to the blood-stained table. Just as her body touched the dry blood on the table, the glass jars that were filled with reproductive organs and such hatred started shattering on the second floor. Horrid laughter, along with non-stop whispers of the dead, began to ripple through the entire estate. "Finally, the perfect sacrifice," declared James. His laughter rose over Janet's horrific screams. Jane stood beside Janet, her right arm raised with the long cutting blade, aligning the blade with Janet's chest. Janet tried to make eye contact with her twin sister as she pleaded for her life. "Please, Jane, please. Please don't kill me." James encouraged Jane. He slipped his hand over her shoulder. "It's all right, Princess. We have found the perfect sacrifice, and you, Jane, have been chosen and must extract her heart for your mother." The terrain around the mansion began to convulse. The marbled granite gravestones roughly sliced in half from the ground up, as did the dim lights in the center of each stone burst, one at a time, shattering the small skulls. The huge fence of thick trees around the 7-acre property began bending in towards the mansion, blood steadily pouring in the mansion through the light sockets and faucets. As the lights flickered throughout the premises, windows and mirrors began to shatter from the first floor to the second. At this time, the non-stop force of chaotic wind was destroying everything in sight, making it hard to handle the long blade that she was going to divide her victim's chest with. Jane grasped the blade even harder, trying to focus on the entry point of her sister's chest. Jane lifted the blade even higher, turning her body around with her arm still raised. She plunges the knife directly into James's heart. The blow knocked him down as he sank in a waist-high river of blood within the room that grew by the second. Blood seeping through the small openings in the light sockets thickened. One by one, the socket fixtures burst off the walls, disappearing in the thick mass of red. Jane unfastened Janet from the table that was already floating. The rich plasma grew up to their shoulders, gushing out every window. Random-sized shards of glasses from all the shattered windows and mirrors were infused in every ounce of obese crimson sea. From the outside of the mansion, steep scarlet waterfalls poured through each window, flowing down into a coarse stream that already surrounded the mansion. Jane and Janet tried making their way through the attic. Shards of glass lashed through their clothes, cutting their arms and legs. "We're trapped," yelled Janet. "There's got to be some way out." They held on tight to each other's arm. "Well, Janet, we could fall down through the blood that's pouring out of the window. The ground is already saturated in a river of blood, so we won't land on the dry ground." "Wait, Jane, but we will be cut from the glass, possibly killed as we make our way down." "Listen, I know you're scared, Janet, but we will be drowned in blood and killed if we don't go out the window. We don't have a choice." "Okay, Jane, let's go." "Okay, Jane, let's go one at a time." Barely having any breathing room at the ceiling, Janet held her breath and used the side panel on the wall to pull herself under the massive cascade, pulling herself out the window. Immediately, Jane followed. Jane surfaced the appalling atmosphere, gasping for air, trying to open her burning eyes, but Janet was nowhere to be found. "Janet! Over here!" yelled Janet from the rooftop. "Oh my, I thought I lost you." Jane made her way to the side of the mansion, where she climbed up the terrace, joining her sister. Looking in every direction, they could feel excessive gravity pulling the top of the huge fence in towards the mansion, gigantically doming above them, slowly closing in the entire 7-acre property. The infuriated bark of trees began to snap, and crack as the sounds echoed through what was left of the horrific nightmare. The movement the fence was taking inward pressured the blood to rise quicker, impatiently swallowing everything in its upward path. The enraged liquid massacre began to boil heavily. "Oh my!" Janet looked at the blood around the mansion. "It's turning black and spreading outward slowly." It was demonic disease seeping out of the mansion. They looked a little closer to find the black part of the blood was now equivalent with sulfuric acid. It was dissolving the house, consuming everything it touched. Sulfuric acid is reactive. It can cause clothes to disintegrate, destroying the outer skin, penetrating into the flesh under the skin. Great pain followed by shock. Prolonged breathing of these vapors can cause respiratory disorders. "We have to get out, but how, Janet? Are we gonna die? What kind of reunion is this?" "The only way out is directly above us, between the trees, closing us in. If only there was some way up through the middle. If we can't get out, the blood will completely fill this place as the trees seal the top." "Wait, what about the gate?" "Well, what about it?" questioned Jane. "There's no way over to it. Acid is consuming the rest of the mansion, and we're on the roof." Janet and Jane embraced each other, settling down on the roof together, crying. "This is it, Jane. We're going to die." "Janet, I'm so sorry I got you in this mess. If I would have stayed in my apartment and not came out here, we both would have got to live longer." The top of the trees enclosed tightly together over their heads as darkness covered every crease and crevice. Acid-infused blood crept up around the top of the roof where they sat in horror, holding the last good thing they would ever feel. "Jane, I have to tell you, I'm pregnant." "Oh my, Janet, I'm so sorry," Jane yelled, sobbing. "We will never get to do anything else together. This is it." Screaming, crying out loud as the bloody acid slowly gormandized their bodies while filling the rest of the emptiness therein. The entire liquid-filled dome started to tremble, exploding into dark vapor, fading up through the morning light, leaving a 7-acre hole in the ground. To be continued. That's the end of this book, but The Haunted 2 is in progress, so stay tuned for an exciting sequel. Thank you all for hanging out. This is my biography from 2018, and a lot has changed since then, and I'll specify what. Doris is an award-winning author, also known as Cannoli and Soul Treasure. Resides in Tucson, Arizona. Published author of The Deep Green Forest in 2015. Currently working on 6 novels consisting of an ancient Egyptian mystery adventure, a graphic horror, which will be a series, and that series will be called The Ice King, and it's based on Cape Hatteras. And I haven't told anybody that. A mind-extracting romance novel, a charming yet intriguing mystery thriller, inspired by a spiritually bruised sanguinarian, which is a vampire. And finally, the remaining untold 2 stories will be suspensefully kept until release. This book is available in paperback form on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Millions, Ingram, Baker & Taylor, and many others. It's available digital worldwide in Nook and Kindle formats. Appreciate you guys. This is the only podcast I've done of this book. Doris Rose is out.